Hi, I'm Debbie Georgatos. Welcome to my show, America, Can We Talk? Today, we're going to talk about the virus is forever, now what? Virus model madness.
Political analyst whose mission is to inspire the American political conversation about preserving liberty in the best country on earth.
We'll talk for today's first five. I'm Debbie Georgatos. We're continuing our efforts here in Dallas, Texas, doing my show from home. Matt, the wonderful producer, is producing a show from his home. And so our set a little bit different, but we are right there in the theme of America Can We Talk, which is to preserve this extraordinary country. I want to start by telling you that I created a petition on the White House website. The petition is essentially called Let Americans Work Again. And if you're interested in signing that petition, I would so appreciate you reading it and considering signing it. You can on our website, americacanwetalk.org. My website, on the homepage, you can find under blogs, it lists the petition. You can now, and the end of the show is really about making the case that America needs to get back to work for a variety of reasons and can get back to work in many, many sectors and for a long time. He's been through a lot in Washington. We're going to touch on different things about his life throughout the show today. But what I want to urge you to do at the first, I have two clips of his. I want to first have Matt the Wonderful play this longer first clip that deals with essentially a questioning back and forth, Dr. Fauci, answering questions essentially about where we are on coronavirus in this country. So here is Dr. Fauci.
Unless we get this globally under control, there's a very good chance that it will assume a seasonal nature, in the sense that even if we, and I hope it's not just if, but when we get it down to the point where it really is at a very low level, we need to be prepared that since it unlikely will be completely eradicated from the planet, that as we get into next season, we may see the beginning of a resurgence. And that's the reason why we're pushing so hard in getting our preparedness much better than it was, but importantly, pushing on a vaccine and doing clinical trials for therapeutic interventions so that hopefully, if in fact we do see that resurgence, we will have interventions that we did not have in the beginning of the situation that we're in right now. Every time I get to that podium in the White House briefing room, Margaret, I always essentially plead with people to please take a look at those very simple guidelines of physical separation, because this virus doesn't discriminate whether you're in a small town in a relatively secluded area of the country versus whether you're in a big city. And sooner or later, you're going to see a surge of cases. So I would urge people to please take a look at that.
Then the other quick clip I'm going to play before I tell you why this is so important in today's first five to understand what he's saying and what implications it has for America and our future of freedom. The other question, there was a much longer discussion in there, which I'll get to in a moment, but the other question, I grabbed a short clip of his answer, relates to the use of the drug, hydroxychloroquine, which is essentially the drug that more and more doctors now are saying they are finding to be actually effective in bringing about the recovery from COVID-19 of patients in our country. So we've had test trials in France, other countries, doctors in other countries are claiming it's working well. It's originally an anti-malarial drug. They're using hydroxychloroquine alone or with other drugs they combine it with. But the point is, it's been doing a great job in numerous places around the world in helping patients suffering from COVID-19 and bringing about their recovery. But here's the answer he gave on the question of essentially how important or effective is hydroxychloroquine. Here's Dr.
The
Fauci.
data are really just at best suggestive. There have been cases that show there may be an effect, and there are others to show there's no effect.
Okay.
So I think in terms of science, I don't think we could definitively say it works.
Okay, folks, the reason this is so important, this first five for today is kind of setting the table for the entire show. In this country and around the world, as we dealt with this shock of 2020, this coronavirus coming out of Wuhan, coming out of China, having a devastating impact around the world, we had many, many governments, including our own, respond with fairly draconian government measures, things not normally seen in our country. From the federal level, of course, we've just had guidelines, suggestions by the president and Dr. Fauci. The president's suggestions coming from what Dr. Fauci is telling him. But around our country, and I think there are only 8 states now remaining that do not have a shelter in place to be open. You literally must close down. We have in Texas and where I am, and most places around the country, we have police more and more empowered to tell people that they're walking too close to each other in public, that you cannot have gatherings of more than 10 people, period. All sorts of restrictions on the otherwise assumption of freedom we live with every day in this country. We had those policies come into place because the coronavirus was a shock to many people. It was something that we did not recognize was going to be so problematic, and we jumped and we kind of easily fell into accepting quite draconian measures on the parts of governors, mayors, and county officials. But what you just heard Dr. Fauci say, what you just heard him say is that this may come back in the fall, and it may even be a seasonal thing. So year after year after year, just like we all have become somewhat accustomed to the flu season, we become accustomed to a season where people tend to get colds, tend to get flus. We may become heading toward a place in our world where we have coronavirus season upon us every year or twice a year. Who knows? He is at another conference, which I did not grab the clip from, but I want to share with you. He made a comment, Dr. Fauci made a comment about the idea that, someone said, well, how long are all these measures going to stay in place? All these new, not just their guidelines at the federal level, at the state and local level, they are mandatory, some carrying actual penalties of arrest and fines. How long should this stay in place? His answer was, until the virus is gone. I want you to let that sink in. He is saying it may last forever. In this interview you just heard, he's saying other places that we have to keep these draconian, repressive, anti-freedom measures in place until the virus is gone. So you put those two things together, and you replay that last shorter clip. It relates to the drug hydroxychloroquine, because he's being asked about, what do you think about this drug and how well it's doing? When I asked Matt to replay that clip, and then we'll talk more about Dr. Fauci.
The data are really just at best suggestive. There have been cases that show there may be an effect, and there are others to show there's no effect.
Okay.
So I think in terms of science, I don't think we could definitively say it works.
Okay, in closing out today's first 5, I want to remind you that we have in our country, doctors around the country saying hydroxychloroquine is working well. We have tests from countries around the world. We have doctors in the state of Utah complaining that they cannot get access to the hydroxychloroquine. They can't prescribe it, even though they want to, because the state has taken control of it. And you have Dr. Fauci in this little clip we just heard. You have Dr. Fauci denouncing hydroxychloroquine, and again, as he has been throughout this time, pushing vaccines. We'll come back to that point later. But I'm going to wrap up the first 5 by saying this. You can be a concerned American who cares about the lives of senior citizens, susceptible and vulnerable Americans, who cares about the future of America, all of the things we all do, and still say we have to look at the question of how much freedom we are surrendering in our country. How much freedom we're surrendering, and not just at this individual moment in response to individual mandates, but the bigger picture. How much freedom are we surrendering when we are saying in our country, well, if the NIH or this Dr. Fauci again tells us in 2 or 3 months, hey, got a new big problem, everybody back home again, school is closed, business closed, do we all just salute? Or do we say, we actually have to have a bigger and better conversation about how we're going to react to this virus, how we retain American-style liberty in this precious country? And that, my friends, is today's first 5. Well, here in Texas, we've had quite an ongoing battle battle is getting close to the right word. We have, a Republican government in Texas, pretty much across the board, Republican governor, majority of the legislature, many jurisdictions around the state, although in the large cities and counties, and here in Dallas, we have Democrat majority government. Democrats run everything in Dallas. So we've had in place a fairly draconian, must stay in place, can't go out. We had our county judge, which is the highest official in Dallas County, literally send in the troops to a business in Dallas, Texas, because it was remaining open after the order came out that all non-essential businesses must close. That business is Hobby Lobby. They were remaining open because they do sell the fabric to make masks, which was considered essential, and they sell school supplies, which are vital for all these parents who are now homeschooling their kids. But we have the county officials storm in, literally stormtroops shut down the store, put a notice on the door, you may not any longer be open. So we have some officials taking their signal that this is their time, their kind of inner tyrant can come out. But in this segment, I want to talk about why some of those things happened and why more and more of us have to be alert to what kind of models, mathematical models, are driving this kind of break, that they were acting on good faith because they simply wanted to protect, I'm talking about elected officials, wanted to protect their citizens. Everyone was sizing up the danger, and as we were sizing up the danger, we had numerous models emerge that people relied on in making policy. And I'm going to tell you, models, and I've said this in the show before, but it matters to keep in mind as we go forward, because many people will point to models and say, well, look at these numbers, look at these predictions. Therefore, any draconian shutdown, can't leave your house, can't open your business, can't go to work, orders are justified because look how terrorizing these models are. So I want to talk about it. This happened in Dallas County. Dallas is not alone. It happened all over this precious country. But you had, number one, you have models that were simply inaccurate, and because they had bad data, made bad assumptions. You also had models driven by some people's political bias. And again, I want to say about political bias. If you're a model maker and you think that your accuracy, your data you put into a model is a life or death decision, and that you therefore should probably err on the side of increasing the hint of danger, increasing the suggestion that there's going to be a serious problem. And the suggestions were not, they're modeling that included things like how many people will contract coronavirus, how many people require hospitalization, how many hospital beds will be required for ICU, intensive care units, how many deaths there may be. So if you're a model maker and you are even one of good faith, you're still driven a little bit by the idea that you want to err on the side of claiming this is a serious problem. You don't want to have anyone be able to point to you and say, look at those models. They were, kind of cavalier, and therefore people got a little bit too confident, or they weren't worried enough. They wouldn't be compliant enough with the government's orders because, after all, they got these kind of not so alarming models. But some models were more than just inaccurate. And I want to mention some of them. We talked about some of them on the show before, but I want to just mention some of them to you so you understand. These were not models, made out of the University of Washington, their Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, IHME, Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation, funded by Bill and Melinda Gates. That organization used numbers more or less that were coming from that organization came up with their own numbers on April 4th, just as an example of how far afield they were from reality. 20,000 or 203,000 Americans requiring hospitalization, blah, blah, blah. In reality, there were 18,000. Reality, how many Americans hospitalized as of April 4th? 18,000. Or it's almost 19,000, 18,988. So almost 19,000 was a real number, but as predicted by the IHME model, they predicted between 120,000 and 203,000 Americans. Model way off. And again, this is not a unheard of institution. University of Washington, very reputable university. You have the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation behind that. Similarly, you had data that came from a group. We've talked about this in a show before, but I want to mention it again. And this is this COVID Act Now group. COVID Act Now. I want to say, you know, it sounded like somebody jumped into action and tried to do something efficiently. This is the data that was relied on in Dallas County that caused the county to pretty much shut down everything in the county. The COVID Act Now, I'm going to tell you again, I mentioned it one time in the show, but tell you again who the people are behind this, lest you think this is some, you know, reputable medical institution. The founders of this website called COVID Act Now that generated numbers used by officials around the country included Democrat Representative Jonathan Christ Tompkins and 3 Silicon Valley tech workers who are also Democrat activists. So the virus comes, they're dying to have a reason to, the Democrats are dying to have a reason to use this as a major crisis to stir up America, because of course they can then, as they have been, use it to attack Donald Trump and the Republicans. But those people who put together COVID Act Now include Zachary Rose and Max Henderson and Igor Kaufman, all also donors to various Democrat campaigns and political organizations since 2016. A couple of them donated to the Hillary Clinton campaign in 2016. Prior to building the COVID Act Now website, Igor Kaufman, created an online game designed to raise $1 million for the eventual 2020 Democrat candidate to defeat President Trump. So these people were not unbiased. On top of that, the numbers, they obviously are Democrat activists. They enjoy creating the perception of chaos in this country because they believe that Donald Trump can be blamed for it. They came up with numbers that were so far afield from reality. I'll just share a couple of them with you so you don't think I'm exaggerating. COVID Act Now predicted that by March 19th, the state of Tennessee could expect 190 hospitalizations. 190. They had instead 15. Similarly, the same organization, COVID Act Now in Georgia, COVID Act Now predicted 688 hospitalizations by March 23rd, and instead they had fewer than 300 hospitalized. And I could go on and on, but they took their data from that Imperial College. We talked about them before, the Imperial College in England that had come up with these just astonishingly scary numbers, and you use those and you say hospitalized now. So I could continue with this, but one more I will do just to make brief reference. We talked about him on the show before, but at Stanford, Professor John, he has I believe it's a Greek last name. I may be mispronouncing it, Iodonis. However you say his name, Professor Iodonis. He is the professor of disease prevention in the School of Medicine. He holds a chair as a professor of disease prevention in the School of Medicine at Stanford, and he sounded the alarm several weeks ago. Our reaction to this virus is wrong. It's off. It's too much. We are, as he said, basically said, of course we have uncertainty. We don't know how it's going to behave. But his concern, among the main points he made in his piece, think about this, you're with Stanford and you're trying to calm the leftist-driven hysteria in this country, and yet he felt compelled to put an opinion piece in the New York Times, the example he gave, where he's basically getting at, look, this is contagious, and people are going to get it, and some percentage of people will become very ill, and some small percentage of people will pass on. But he's saying we are reacting. He said we have very, very different public policy if we're reacting to projected 2 million deaths or 3 million than a far lower number. So he's looking at mortality rate. How many people in our country who contract this are likely to die? One thing he talked about, he had the only example they had at the time, which was a closed population of people, was that cruise ship, the Diamond Princess cruise ship, where they had people contracted and it spread very quickly throughout that cruise ship. In that cruise ship, they had 700 infected passengers. 700 contracted the coronavirus. They had, among that 700, 7 pass away. 7. Real death rate. And so he talks about the death rate there, which is 0.125, and says even if you take the normal statistical assumptions about the, this percentage could be wrong, the death rate could be inaccurate, so you do a range below, range high, he's still saying the real death rate could stretch as far as 0.025 to 5 times higher, which is still just 0.625. I am not saying that the deaths of individuals don't matter. Obviously, everyone's life matters. We make policy to protect life. But it gets around to the last thing I want to remind you, 2 last things about data before we get to talking about what we're going to do about this in our country. One thing that I want to mention is that even the Fauci, who is running our whole reaction to the coronavirus, said in a piece in the New England Journal of Medicine, and this was in, I believe, February. I don't have the date in front of me. But in February, based on all the data he knew, he said, we're likely to have the overall clinical consequences of COVID-19 maybe more akin to those of a severe seasonal influenza, which has a case fatality rate of approximately 0.1. So even he, the architect of our everyone stay home and don't do anything, is saying it's a low death rate. I'm not saying death rate doesn't matter. I'm saying you have to have those factors in order to get to the proper policy, which ties me into what I want to remind you again on bad modeling, where we are. You had Dr. David Katz. He is with Yale University. He's the president of the True Health Initiative and the founding director of the Yale Griffin Prevention Research Center. His institution is so well respected. He gets CDC research money. Katz wrote in the New York Times that we had approached the threat we all face from coronavirus with the wrong model. His words, I talked about in the show before, but today I've linked this story. You can read it yourself in his words. His basic argument is that we should have responded to the coronavirus with a vertical interdiction. A vertical meaning you focus in on the susceptible people. You focus in on those who are vulnerable, which are, people of a certain age, health backgrounds, immune deficiency for whatever reasons, other health challenges that make you more vulnerable. Focus public policy on protecting them. He was saying that's what we should have done. We did instead was horizontal interdiction, that we went about handling our reaction to coronavirus by telling the broad swath of perfectly healthy American people that you have to stay home, that you must stay home, that you are frozen in place. And he was saying this horizontal interdiction, even he talked about this can have a very detrimental effect, not just on our country and on people not being very happy, but actually in the whole way our culture deals with and responds to this virus. So I'll tell you one more data point that is just, I think, impossibly important, and then a story. In fact, I'll do the data point and then the story to tell you what is happening in our country. We have a media predictions. It's not okay to do that, but maybe that was in the back of the minds of some people. But I want to tell you something CDC did, and we've been talking about these kind of things in the show. I didn't go into this, I don't think, last week, but I want to be sure to mention to you. CDC, the Center for Disease Control, which is the official organ of our country that puts out the information that tells people percentage of people at risk, people who have contracted it, people who have been hospitalized, people who have passed on from it. They're the official data crunchers. The CDC put out official advice in this country telling hospitals to list COVID-19, the disease you contract from coronavirus, to list COVID-19 as the cause of death in cases, even if you're just assuming or it only contributed. So they're saying, even if you're just making an assumption, you can list coronavirus as the cause of death, COVID-19 as the cause of death, when you really don't know it was the cause of death, or if it only contributed to the cause of death. So now there's new data out showing that, every year, sadly, in this country, we lose people to a variety of diseases, including pneumonia. Well, there's now data out showing that the number of deaths from pneumonia that are lower than normally, they're below the norm for where we should be right now, while all these COVID-19 deaths are listed as, it seem higher, but it's because the hospitals are being told if a patient dies of pneumonia, but it appears you assume maybe COVID was part of it, or maybe COVID-19 contributed to the cause of death, put the cause of death as COVID-19. The point, my friends, is that we have the official arm of the federal government pushing up the numbers, trying to increase the numbers of people in our country that are listed as having died of COVID-19. And I'm talking about artificially, dishonestly, lifting those numbers up, pushing numbers higher to frighten and scare Americans. So last thing is just a very, this little case I'll mention just in a moment, but in the state of Connecticut, we actually women and just everyone, a baby died of coronavirus. How could this be? So Candace Owens, never one to hold back when she's concerned about something. She dove into it. Candace Owens, the founder of Blexit, the Black conservative activist, she dove into it and it appears was given information by the hospital. Someone from the hospital contacting her saying, you know what, actually, that's not really right what the hospital said, attributing the cause of death of this baby to coronavirus. The baby, sadly, seems to have been asphyxiated, or whether it was an accident, the baby was in the care of a caretaker, whether the asphyxiation occurred, sadly, unfortunately, or, by accident, but for whatever reason that can occur, could have been sudden infant death, could have been just an unfortunate accident at home. The point is the baby was non-responsive and did pass on due to asphyxiation. And the autopsy included, the baby's been exposed to coronavirus. These are two different points. The fact that, and heaven forbid, I'm telling you, friends, the idea of losing a baby, any parent on the planet knows to lose a baby has to be devastating. I am not in the slightest, mitigating their loss or in any way. I am just saying that this is a great example of the government using coronavirus, COVID-19, to spread fear. In the case of Connecticut, probably also to access more tax dollars in their state because they have now a recorded death of a baby. And so now the hospital, because Candace Owens raised such a point about it, in fact, she has called for the governor to resign. The hospital is actually looking into it again, saying, we'll get back to you about that. We're not really too sure about that. What really happened with that baby. And I'm just getting at my point in these kind of understandings. I'm talking about why our virus response and a second opinion needed is we are too far down the path. We are too far down the path in this country of just having our opinions shaped and our reactions shaped, our expectations shaped by people who are manipulating data and being dishonest with the American people about the coronavirus. So I want to turn and talk about why I say second opinion needed. And I am, obviously a little bit of a play on the, people get all sorts of times they go to the doctor and decide they want to get a second opinion before they undergo surgery or treatment for a variety of conditions. America needs a second opinion beside Dr. Fauci. And I do not, I don't know the man. He is 79 years old. He's been in that position or in some position in the federal government dealing with disease management like forever. But he is someone who had experience dealing with pandemics during President Obama's term, dealt with swine flu, did nothing like we're doing now. Nothing like we're doing now. Even after more cases and more deaths, he was out there saying the best advice he had, no advice about shutdown, no advice, stay at home, no advice, all essential businesses must be shut down. Just kind of a, if your kids aren't feeling well, keep them home from school. If you don't feel good, stay home, take it easy, get lots of rest, kind of advice. I'm getting at that we are in our country, we have to recognize that the advice being given to our president is from Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci has a lot of reasons that you could be a little bit concerned about him, starting with the idea that I don't know why, if the other doctors we mentioned have been talking about we're overreacting, we need to do vertical interdiction, why can't we just protect the vulnerable and not sentence everyone to stay at home? You don't hear those kind of things out of Dr. Fauci. In fact, he was lamenting recently lamenting he cannot possibly understand why the few remaining states that actually let their citizens go outside, that don't have shelter-in-place orders. He doesn't understand what's wrong with them. Of course, they should be doing that. He actually made reference to the destruction of the American economy and the danger to our economy of just having it frozen as an inconvenience. It's just inconvenient for Americans. And so I think he's, number one, not behaving the way Fauci, not behaving the way he did under President Obama, not really responding to very renowned experts in the fields of infectious disease who are saying that we could try a more focused approach, we could try a more narrow approach. He's kind of good with the way things are going in our country, which is pretty much we have our country frozen in place. I'll also mention Fauci's the one who is just a you're allowed to like whatever politicians you want. He has a very bizarre relationship and very bizarre fondness for Hillary Clinton. He twice, in things we talked about in the show before and has put out what are now public emails because they were discovered in the course of looking into the Russia-Trump collusion and all the emails that Hillary and her team were receiving. Fauci was sending emails to Cheryl Mills, the Hillary Clinton lawyer, not just saying, tell Hillary, hang in there, great job, good speech today. Two different times that we know of, put in emails to Cheryl Mills, please tell Hillary we love her. Her speech brings tears to my eyes. He was praising her for her testimony in front of the Benghazi hearing, which brought her to her famous, what difference at this point does it make when we had the loss of 4 Americans at the hands of Islamic terrorists in Benghazi, and she and her team covered up for and lied over a period of time about what really went on in Benghazi. So, we have a Fauci guy who's fond of Hillary, who is made this comment about it being inconvenient, as though that was really the reason, and behaved very differently under the time when you had a very, very serious, pandemic happening with swine flu. Last thing people have been talking about, I really do think, when I name this segment Second Opinion, I think President Trump, needs to identify 1, 2, 3, or 4 other true experts in infectious diseases, not people affiliated with Hillary Clinton, not people affiliated with the Clinton Foundation, as Dr. Birx is, not people who have been on the American left, but infectious disease experts. Bring in this Dr. Cass from Yale, bring in the Ioannidis guy from Stanford, bring in the other 2 Stanford professors, medical professors, who also wrote a Wall Street Journal piece saying this is a crazy overreaction. Get some of those people into position so Dr. Fauci does not have the unique dictatorial position of the dictator of all policy, health policy, related to how we're going to deal with the coronavirus. We need to have a renewed feel in Washington that says we're not going to surrender to the Fauci edicts, given there are enough reasons to be concerned about where he's coming from and what he stands for. I'm not saying he's a bad guy and want Americans to die. I am saying he's a leftist. And I want to get into one last point about him that is troubling me more and more. And I want to share it with you. And some of you actually, and my listeners, emailed me or put notes up on, I can't remember where all the places. I get information from or contact from so many listeners via email and comments on YouTube and on Facebook and private message and also and Twitter. So it's a little bit hard to keep up where they're all coming from. But I have had more and more messages about the idea of Fauci should actually be questioned just because of his affiliation with Bill Gates. And I will say I am very appreciative for some things, in fact many things Bill Gates and the Gates Foundation have done. They are trying to do well. They're trying to help the world. They're trying to do good things. But does not mean just because Bill Gates means well and his foundation means well that his foundation's activities or views should guide and direct American healthcare policy. So let me tell you what I'm talking about. Actually, one last little thing. I saw people making comments about how the how Fauci had made a speech at Georgetown right before President Trump took office. It was early January 2017, so Trump had won, but he wasn't in office yet. He was going to be sworn in January 21st, but Fauci made a speak at an infectious diseases conference at Georgetown in which he basically said, he felt, based on his years and years of experience in Washington, there was no doubt that Trump will face a surprise infectious disease outbreak. Now, people are saying this makes Fauci doubly suspicious because what is he talking about? Here we are in 2017, and he's predicting an infectious disease outbreak. Of course, Fauci says, you know what, as he even said in his statement, based on my years of experience and watching pandemics move around the country, I think these things are, likely. It's certainly in the realm of likelihood. But now I want to talk just a little bit about plant these seeds, and we'll be talking about this more in the days and weeks going forward about how much we have just a very questionable feel coming from Fauci as it relates to to Bill Gates and their initiative. To start with, there was an event called Event 201. And by the way, everything we're talking about, you can read the articles on my website, americacanwetalk.org. On the homepage, under shows, drop down list of links. You can find all these articles, and you can find my petition. I'm mentioning it at the close of the show. My petition is on the homepage. You can click on that and go and sign the petition. I urge you to do that. You get 30 days to get 100,000 signatures. We're already 4 days into it, so we probably won't get to 100,000, but I'm going to try. I want to get enough signatures and the point of my petition, to be clear, is to inspire the Trump administration, to send the message to him, the American people are with you. We want to have our country return to work. We want to have some of these draconian orders lifted. We want America back engaged. So, but to tie in Fauci and Bill Gates, in October of 2019, there was an event that was called Event 201. The event was sponsored by and participated in by Johns Hopkins Bloomberg School of Public Health, the Center for Health Security, World Economic Forum, and the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. At Event 201, it was invitation only, small group of world leaders basically planning out what would the world do? How would we react? How ready are we to respond to a pandemic? And they specifically talked about a pandemic involving a coronavirus. Now, if you don't know, to be clear, coronavirus is not a new word that came up in this era in 2020 from the Wuhan, where it spawned from Wuhan and moved into the world. Coronavirus is a term, it's years and years old. It's been used in the past to refer to other viruses. This is now being called the novel coronavirus because it's a new one, but it's a type of virus. So back to Event 201, Bill Gates participated in and his foundation and talked about essentially how would the world respond to a coronavirus pandemic. So, I will say this in a positive way. I think truly Bill Gates, he made his billions, and I think honestly, it kind of, for many people who come into that kind of wealth, who don't inherit it, who make it, I think many of them have the sense, I should be trying to do something good with my money. I should try to be trying to help the world. I should not be just floating around on a yacht someplace and, zipping around on my private jet. I should be doing things for the world. I will credit him with good intent and good faith. And this is a really logical thing, even though for the common people in America, like you and me, it would seem kind of exotic and extreme. This is the kind of thing they think of, what are you going to do? How are you going to try to help? So trying to help the world figure out, are we ready for a coronavirus pandemic? However, so flowing from that and related to that, it's important to understand that there is a mission within the United Nations, this idea of this 2030, the year 2030, by the year 2030, the World Health Organization being behind this, we can essentially solve many of the world's problems. There's a list of 19 things we can solve: poverty, racism, illiteracy, hunger. It lists all these things we can solve in the world. Most of those things, and the agenda, of course, is how do we get there? How do we make the whole world? It's kind of utopian. I think it's unrealistic, but it's 2030 is this idea we can make the world some utopia. Among the things that they list, the goals they have, the vast majority of them include the goal of getting the whole world vaccinated. everybody must be vaccinated. And so there is a mission, and Bill Gates, obviously, and his foundation, hugely supportive of vaccinating people around the world. And, some people look at that and say, hey, he's just trying to help, it's just in fact, this him, and why I think Trump needs a new person. He needs a second opinion on how he should respond to this coronavirus. There is, from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, there is a global health leaders. They launched a decade of vaccines collaboration. So they collected world leaders. Global health leaders launched decade of vaccines collaboration, and they're basically trying to get world leaders to collaborate on how do we come together and get the whole world vaccinated, leave no one behind. Many statements that make it sound like, you're pretty much going to be either forced into this or in some way have your rights limited if you don't participate. But on the list of the Leadership Council of the Global Health launch of the decade of vaccine collaboration is none other than Dr. Anthony Fauci. So I'm closing my segment, and I have like one more segment to hit in just a moment, a very quick thing. But my point in talking about this is it has been surprising and alarming and not good to realize how often Dr. Fauci has eye-rolled or dismissed or mocked the idea that the hydroxychloroquine and other similar drugs being tested and manufactured ought to be released and used as quickly as possible in our fight with the coronavirus. This unbelievable problem, and we have hydroxychloroquine, doctors around the world saying we're seeing cures, we're seeing people recover from the coronavirus, recover from COVID-19, but somehow, when those stories are told or he's on stage, he's very, as he was in that clip he played in the start of our show, kind of like, well, yeah, it could be help. I'm not too sure about that. I mean, not giving credit to it that other doctors are. And the broader other point, and I'm going to close up this segment in one more extremely short segment about why we shouldn't weaken ourselves in light of what China is doing. There is, in this whole way in America, that we are deciding how we deal with the coronavirus and with COVID-19. It's actually a very vivid display of the difference between how a globalist, left-wing, control freak mindset works and how America and freedom are supposed to work. And so when Fauci is up there being the advisor, more or less, to President Trump, and everything that is coming out of him, coming out of President Trump, is emboldening and encouraging and legitimizing the elected officials around this country, governors, county commissioners, or whatever the head of your county is called, mayors, city councils, issuing edicts. It's all a response that is of the mindset that says, the ruling elite's going to solve this, the Bill Gates, et cetera, we're going to solve this. All we need is the power, and we need you to be fearful, so you give us the power, so you don't question anything we say, you don't question anything we do, and you're going to, if we say the vaccine is the answer, you're going to do the vaccine. And if we say that you're going to stay in your home every time coronavirus comes about, seasonally every year, everyone's going to run back and salute in their home. This is how the left-wing mindset works. I will give, as I said earlier in the show, I will say when we first had this crisis arise in this country, we had people even on the right say, you know what, we have a pretty big problem here. We don't understand how this virus works. We don't want to endanger our people. The safest course is to go on nationwide lockdown. Only essential businesses open. Only essential reasons to leave your house. Mandated, stay in your home and walk in public 6 feet apart and do all these rules, things that the government is imposing. This is that left-wing mindset that says, let us take control and we're going to decide everything and you're just going to salute. And in the beginning, it was kind of like, okay, maybe we have to do this because we're not quite sure what is happening here, but we've been in this long enough. We have now, out of Washington, we have both Fauci, Birx, and others saying that the next 2 weeks are crucial The next 2 weeks will tell us so much about the trend and the famous curve and flattening the curve and the numbers and where we are. We're going to know all this supposedly in the next couple of weeks. But the spirit of liberty is rising up in this country. The spirit of liberty, people saying, wait a minute. You're telling us the virus is going to come back and be seasonal? You're telling us you're almost sure to be back in the fall? How long are we going to live in this more or less police state mindset that waits to be told whether we're allowed to go to work, whether we're allowed to open our business, whether we're allowed to go out in public for reasons that are not essential? There is a spirit of liberty rising in this country that recognizes we can handle the virus in the way Dr. Katz, and so the last thing, I don't have much time left in the show today, so I'm just going to cover this in a cursory way. I think we'll be getting back to China, the subject of China later in the week, but I want to mention world leader or attempting to, emerging as a world leader and trying through their officials in various countries all over the world, their representatives from China in countries all over the world, to paint, not only to paint America as the bad guy, but to paint America as inept, as America unable to take care of the problem, as China having been far better, far more efficient, far better in every way in having handled this problem. And so they are literally positioning themselves to benefit in their long-term mission for world domination. If you don't know anything about China's mission for world domination, we've had this topic in my show many times. We've had experts from China. We've had Gordon Chang talk about it is the long-term Chinese mission since the time of the emperors. It is a view held by today by the Communist Party that China, the people, the Chinese people, were intended to have dominion over the world. It is an ancient Chinese philosophy. It is also the philosophy of the Chinese Communist Party today. They intend world domination. You can listen to my Gordon Chang interviews. You can listen to other interviews I've done recently of various experts who've talked about, written books about China, talked about what China is engaged perpetually in warfare against us, and we don't even see it, because they're not lobbing bombs and sending submarines over here to sink our ships or something. They're not doing those things. Very high level, sophisticated, ongoing warfare by China against America. They're taking advantage of coronavirus, which gets me around to pointing out that this is the reason America cannot weaken itself in the world to demand that America fire Mike Pompeo, that America get to tell America we have to fire Secretary of State Mike Pompeo because they don't like the Pompeos pointing out the truth of how extremely, dramatically, and dangerously China is attempting to expand power as a response to the virus they themselves unleashed on the world. I could talk more about that, but as Matt, the producer, if we were in studio, he would be trying to signal me saying, hey, I think we're about out of time here. So we're about out of time. But I always, at the close of my show, tell you, first of all, why I do this show. I do this show. I've been doing it for over 5 years out of a singular mission to protect, defend, speak up for, and speak out about the extraordinary, unique greatness of America and how it is our generation's turn to understand and defend and protect America. It's our coronavirus to attack President Trump, to undermine our nation, our entire nation. We have our economy shut down, weakening our country. These are the kinds of things I talk about in the show because ultimately, the show is dedicated to preserving America, the most extraordinary, unique experiment in human liberty ever to bless this earth. And I close out every show by telling you why the stories we talked about today matter to you. So we talk at first on the show today. The virus is forever. We just had Dr. Anthony Fauci tell us so. Virus is forever. So it matters because initially the U.S. pandemic responses were reasonable in relation to the sense of emergency, urgency, and protectiveness versus a not yet understood virus sourced to China. Anecdotally, CDC and toxicology studies will leave anyone, I won't even talk about this, I will talk about another show. If you ever talk to anyone who's actually studied toxicology and gone through advanced training, they'll tell you the world is filled with viruses and germs and microbes, things that, I mean, I've had friends tell me who've gone to grad school to study this kind of stuff, to say you leave classes thinking, how did humanity ever survive for a day given the astonishing number of various kinds of heritage? And take the 50,000-foot long-term view. Life is meant to be lived, to have a purpose, vitality, joy, not perpetual, long-term shelter in place every flu season. Men and women are to have a sense of dominion, of overcoming, not hapless surrendering. Can the government tell us who can work and when? Can they tell us what drugs and vaccines we must have? When do we vote to give up all of our freedom? Sign and share my petition. Again, it's called Let Americans Work Again on my website, americacanwetalk.org. On the viral model madness, I got to tell you folks, model creators, they may have had good intentions, but they're human. They have fears. They need and they like money. They can gather wrong data or misinterpret data. They have agendas, both international and domestic. CDC is directing, facilitating, overlisting of COVID-19 as the cause of death, distorting data, distorting truth, manipulating America. A Connecticut governor misstated the cause of an infant death, maybe to get more funding, but he stoked unfounded fears. COVID Act Now, purposely stoking fear to encourage stronger government action. Do not bow to experts or models as if they are infallible, because they are not. On the virus response and a second opinion needed beyond that of Dr. Anthony Fauci, Yale professor Katz touts vertical interdiction, focus on the vulnerable. Multiple doctors now touting positive results from hydroxychloroquine. Yet Fauci, Burke's prescription is based on models that are not panning out. It's absolutely killing small business throughout the country. Anthony Fauci is a problem. The Bill Gates Fauci worldview has a distinct bias for global vaccination mandates. Fauci interprets information to confirm his biases. Virus could be forever until the vaccine. Hydroxychloroquine, not certain. He's too dismissive of it. Bizarrely professes his love for Hillary Clinton. Okay, he's a very weird guy. Pre-Trump inauguration speech, January at Georgetown, January 2017, predicts a surprise disease outbreak to face Trump, dismisses economic collapse as inconvenient. Fauci was not elected emperor. Trump needs a second opinion. And finally, China exploits a weakened America. This is the other reason, besides just wanting America to be strong again, is recognizing we weaken, we're going to be hurt by our enemies. Focus on disease analysis and statistics must not blind Americans to the big picture. What is happening to America and who is benefiting from a weakened America? Enemies are not sitting still. China, which is still pursuing its mission of world domination, is pushing for Pompeo's dismissal, attempting PR plays with claimed, didn't even get into all this, claimed shipments of ventilators massed to other countries, some of which didn't work or were faulty, churning lies and disinformation about the origin, the spread, and the current status in China, effectively killing off democracy protests in Hong Kong, refusing acknowledgement of Taiwan to the World Health Organization. There's more at stake than flattening the curve. The world needs a strong America. And that, my very precious friends, is America Can We Talk for today. Thank you so much for listening. You can email me at americacanwetalk@gmail.com. I love trying to answer. I'm way behind, but I love trying to answer. I love and so appreciate the opportunity to talk to you every single day, Monday through Thursday, 3 p.m. Central Time, to talk about America, the most precious, extraordinary gift we have been given, a gift of living in freedom. And I do this show to protect and preserve America. I speak up for America because America matters. I'll talk to you next time.
America, Can We Talk? Truth about America.